Well, people, today is Monday, October 24, 2022. Everybody okay with taping? Yes? Okay, thank you very much. We're on page 544 in chapter 27, and we're having a conversation. We had a conversation already about in blank, you sign something, a blank endorsement means what? That means what? You signed the what? You signed the back of your check, right? We talked about that, right? So it's counterintuitive. When you do a special endorsement, you say what? Pay to order so-and-so, and you sign it, or you sign it and say pay to order so-and-so, they can receive it. Without recourse, when do we use that? When an agent or attorney who is merely endorsing a check of a third person to a client might make a qualified endorsement because he or she is not actually party to the transaction. So what happens is their qualified endorsement disclaims certain of the endorsers' secondary liabilities for payment of the instrument in the event that the original parties do not pay the instrument as it provides. And then, what's a restrictive endorsement? That's when you write on the back of your check what? For deposit only, right? For deposit only. So for deposit only, and that means it's going to be what put into the bank, right? We read about that. Now, multiple payees. On page 544, ordinary one person's name. Okay, what if it says Jack and Jill on the check? Who has to sign the check? Jack and what? Now, what does it say, Jack or Jill? Yeah, either or, right? So ordinary one person's name is paid to instrument, but two or more payees may be named. In that case, the instrument may be specified that it is payable to one or more of them, or that it is payable to all jointly. If the instrument is made payable to the order of Ferns and Percy, then Ferns and Percy are joint payees, and the endorsements of both Ferns and Percy are required to negotiate the instrument, right? So both of them have to sign that, okay, in order to cash it. That's when it's...
Have the same last name, like Mr. and Mrs., Jones.
Mr. and Mrs.
And
Jones.
Robert Jones.
Technically, they should both sign that, right? Right? Technically, they should both sign it. You might be able to get away with signing the back of it, Mr. and Mrs., but technically, it's made out to both of them, right?
That happens is sometimes people just don't put and or over, they just put the two names on the check, and in that case, we have to assume that it's and.
Okay, and that's our banker back there, okay? And, to be safe, right? To be safe, they both have to... What do you do when you have Mr. Mrs. or a Reverend Mrs. What? Professor Mrs. What do you do?
Well, like normally in that case, it would be like right after a wedding or something.
Yes, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, actually just had someone come in the other day. They were in together, they said they just got married, they had a bunch of checks to say Mrs. and Mr. And we could do that at our own discretion.
Okay.
So they had a check that was written out to them, Mr. and Mrs.
Yeah.
Did they both sign it or no?
They both, yeah.
Oh, you had them both sign.
They both have to sign it, and also we have to make sure that Mrs. and Mrs. is compliant for them. Because everyone speaks out the same last name, so realistically, they just got lucky and found what.
So did they have to show their wedding certificate to you or what?
Well, usually it would anyways, because usually if they're coming in there and somebody just got married and they have to.
Oh, if they just got married. But what if someone just comes in who's already been married for 20, 30 years and the check says Mr. and Mrs.? Do you have them both sign? Or sometimes you just let the person sign the back, say,
If it says and, then both people have to sign it.
okay, so Mr. and Mrs., whatever, you're going to have the Mrs. sign and the Mr. sign, right?
In some cases, they would have to both be present too. If
Oh, yeah. That's I do a joke about that. Go ahead.
If they don't have any accounts that are joined together, one person is in front of us, then we're not able to deposit that, except unless we have to put an extended hold on it. So it might be held for 7 business days. So it might not helpful for a while, but just make sure that it is done. Yeah.
Here's something I usually say over the years. I say, are there some women, some wives, or partners, when it might be, right, who sign the back of the husband's check, and so if they go to the teller, say, oh, your husband forgot to sign the check. Oh, excuse me.
Yeah.
Or if the husband comes in and he signs the check, the teller's gonna be like, hold it. That's not your signature. Why? Because the wife's been signing all the time, right? Does that happen in real life? Does that happen sometimes? Where the wife goes and she At least in the old days, it may have happened more and more, right? Go ahead and sign, something like that. Sure, you know?
People that try that.
Huh?
There's definitely people that try that. Like, because, well, every single person, when they make an account nowadays, you have whenever they like sign something, you make a signature card. So that signature is now in the system. So we could always like.
If it doesn't match.
Oh, so you can always check it out.
Check it out. And also, if it's somebody else like depositing check on behalf of somebody else.
Yeah.
And it's not signed, and then they like pay the check, you go get a car and come right back in, like, you definitely didn't get that person to sign, you just took the check back, signed it, car on
Yeah.
behalf.
Yeah.
Which you're not supposed to do. You know, one thing with husband and wife, you know, maybe the teller might look the other way if they know. But then again, it's a problem too, because what if there's a divorce going on, right? You don't know what's happening in people's lives.
Right.
Okay, so and the book even has some different examples about that. But I always ask that question: Do you think that that there are some women who sign the back, or even men who sign the back of their wives' check? It's like the teller wouldn't know the signature if they saw it of the real person, because the other person was signing it for the last 20 years, right? So here, if the instrument is payable to alternative payees, or if it has been negotiated to the alternative endorsees, such as Stahl or Glass, or Stahl/Glass, it may be endorsed and delivered by either of them. So it has or, either one can sign, and both must sign. Summary for me, please. On the bottom of page 547, it says, here's how negotiation occurs, holders in due course. And I have down here, holders have the same rights as a contract assignee. Okay, go ahead. Will someone read it for me, please?
27-3D.
Yes, ma'am.
There is one additional aspect of the resolution that affects the rights and liabilities of the parties to an instrument. A holder of an instrument possesses an instrument that runs to him, which means the instrument is payable to his order, is bearer paper, or is endorsed to him. A holder has all of the rights afforded under Article 3. As noted in the discussion of the benefits of negotiable instruments, the goal is to have payment rights passed without fear of underlying contract suits. However, the rights of a holder are no different from the rights of a contract assignee. The assignee of a contract is in the same position and has the same rights as the marriage holder. For example, if a farmer who to pay for a tractor has a loan to farmer, he has no rights to payment on the note. Anyone who is assigned that note as an assignee or holder is also subject to the farmer's defense. Let's see, figure 27-A, and also the provisions on consumer credit protection under discussion of Federal Trade Commission protections for consumer defense in chapters 30. Unlike ordinary holders or assignees, holders in due course take free of contract assignment defenses that are good against ordinary holders or assignees. The exception is for consumer credit contracts. Certain types of consumer credit contracts allow defenses even against holders in due course. For example, if a homeowner signs a home solicitation contract and a promissory note for a roof replacement, the roofing company could sell the note to a finance company. The finance company would be a holder in due course, but if the roof were improperly installed, the homeowner could assert that the personal defense against the HDC finance company because of the FTC protections. Figure 27-A 8 shows the different rights of holders, assignees, and
Thank you. Now notice, it says here that ordinary holders or assignees, right? So holder has the same rights as a contract assignee. Remember, and thanks again for reading that. Remember when we did the HBB example with the surfboards, right? And they transferred, they signed the contract, right? West Coast Financials, right? And they had the contract with Water Sports and everything like that. So we had to pay. So they're talking about here, if you're a holder, then you have the same rights as that of an assignee. But now, holder in due course gives you greater rights, right? Greater rights, okay? And you take free of contract assignment defenses that are good against ordinary holders or assignees, but they're not good against what? Your HDC, right? Now, what is an HDC? What is a holder in due course? What are the requirements of a holder in due course? And it says to obtain the preferred status of holder in due course, there are 4 additional requirements. Go ahead. Someone read for me, please. Value.
Value is similar to consideration in chapter 14.
Mm-hmm.
For example, a person who receives a negotiable note as a gift does not give value because gifts are not supported by consideration or value. Value can be money, services, or an underlying debt. As with consideration, the courts do not consider whether the value is enough. They determine only whether some value has been given. A bank gives value to the extent that the bank allows a customer who has deposited a check to withdraw funds against that deposit. For example, if Janice deposits a $300 check into her account, which already has $400 in it, Janice's bank does not give value until Janice has written checks or withdrawn funds beyond the existing $400. The code follows FIFO, first in, first out, for drawing on funds.
Thank you. So notice we talked about chapter 14, thanks for reading, right? Where we learned about value, right? And consideration, okay? A value could be consideration of an antecedent debt. It could be security given in exchange for the transfer of a negotiable instrument, or the creation of a what? Security interest, right? We learned. So value, you have to have value. What's the other one? Good faith. What is good faith, and what is the close connection doctrine, and how does the close connection doctrine play into the factor of an HDC? Good faith. Let's say here, the element of good faith for becoming an HDC requires that a holder of a negotiable instrument act with what? Honesty in fact. Honesty in fact. In acquiring an instrument. You have to be honest, right? Can't lie, can't steal, can't cheat, right? Carl Llewellyn, one of the key drafters of the UCC, said that to comply with reasonable standards and good faith, the party must act with a pure heart and an empty head. What's bad faith? Bad faith sometimes exists just because the transferee takes the instrument under such odd circumstances. What's the example I give you? If a transferee buys a note made payable to the state from an accountant in a bar at midnight, suspicion prevents HDC status, right? Should we do that kind of stuff at that time of night? Now, what in the world is the close connection doctrine? Someone read that for me, please?
The close connection doctrine applies when the transfer has taken some of the instruments from the transfer or is so closely connected with the transfer that any knowledge of the transfer is deemed transferred to the holder. For example, Salmons Roofing finances its commercial customers' roofing repairs by having them sign promissory notes. Salmon sells all of these notes to Fidelity Finance. Fidelity pays for the notes and takes in good faith, qualifying as an HDC. However, Fidelity has increasingly difficulty collecting payments because customers all complain about the lack of quality from Salmon's repairs. Because Fidelity buys all Salmon's notes, they have become closely connected and gains knowledge of problems.
Thank you. So what are they saying here? They're saying, thanks for reading that again. They're saying that the person who received this instrument, right, there'll be circumstance or evidence that that there's an ongoing, first there's a close relationship. Okay, we see a close relationship that's going on, right, with them. But the person who received the instrument should be on notice that there's a problem, right? Because they're so close with the people, right? They should have noticed there's a problem with the instrument. Now, what happens when there's no knowledge? Want to keep reading for us, please, sir? The no knowledge part on page 547.
An instrument can be negotiated even though it has been dishonored, and it is open to such as a check. That cannot stand for more than a reasonable time. These instruments can be transferred, and the transfer is still a holder. However, the fact that or after it has been dishonored is suspicious, and results in notice from the circumstances that there may be some adverse and would have done. The person who applies under such circumstances can be a holder but cannot be a holder in due course. For example, buying a discounted note after its due date is noticed as something usually wrong with the instrument.
Yeah, so here they can't be HTC because, thank you for reading that, sir, because they have noticed that something might be wrong with it, right? Because it's overdue. So you have to have value and good faith, right? Value, knowledge, anything is wrong. Ignorance of defenses and adverse claims. Prior parties on an instrument may have defenses that entitle them to withhold payments from a holder of an instrument. The drawer of a check, upon demand for payment by the payee, could assert a defense to payment that the merchandise the payee delivered under the terms of their underlying contract was defective. A person who acquires an instrument with notice or knowledge that there is such a defense cannot be, right? Cannot be an HCC. In general, transferees who are aware of facts that would make a reasonable person ask questions are deemed to know what they would have learned if they had asked the questions. Such knowledge and the failure to ask questions will cost them HDC status. They remain simply what? Holders, right? Holders. So HDC status means, hey, you have to give for value and good faith without any knowledge of adverse claims or offenses to the instrument. Defenseless to payment of a negotiable instrument. Someone read that for me, please. 27-4, page 5, 48.
Is to be able to payment on a negotiable instrument free of any underlying problems between the original parties to the instrument. There are two classifications of defenses. HTCs take free of the first type of defense, called the limited defenses. However, HTCs are subject to the widow or universal defenses. Holders are subject to all.
Thank you. Let me read that. Let me just go back. So here it's saying one of the key reasons for becoming a holder in due course, right, is to be able to get the negotiable instrument free of any problems, right, any underlying problems from the original party. And then they give us two classifications of offenses. HCC are free from the first type of offense, which is our limited offenses, right? But they are subject to the real offenses and universal offenses, and a holder is subject to what? All the offenses, right? All of them. Keep going, please. Let's look at limited offenses.
HCCs are not subject to any of the following offenses. Ordinary contract offenses. Offenses that involve breach of contract issues cannot be raised against an HCC. Defenses such as lack of consideration or failure to perform are examples of some of the contract offenses related to the underlying transaction that cannot be raised as a defense in paying an HCC. For example, a business person cannot refuse to pay a holder in due course on the note used to pay for her copy machine just because her copy machine does not have the speed she was promised.
Okay, very good. Let's look at the next one, please. What is it? Fraud and inducement?
The person is recruited or induced to execute the instrument because of fraudulent statements. Such fraud and inducement cannot be raised against the HCC. For example, suppose Mills is paid to purchase an automobile because of leading statement stating that the car was a demonstrator for dealership, and this mechanical reason is a certification of the dealership had been met. Mills, a car dealer, who received a note which is negotiated until it reaches Pam, who is an HCC. Mills, meanwhile, learns that the car has been in an accident and have a cracked engine block that the head mechanic completely decided to duplication and that payment statements were fraudulent. When Tian receives the payment of the note, Mills cannot refuse to pay on the grounds of payment fraud. Mills must pay the note because Tian, as an HCC, does not take the note subject to any form of representation in the underlying transaction. Mills is left with the remedy of recovering from pagans for misrepresentation or fraud.
Thank you. So can Mills go after the HDC? What's the answer? No, right? Who does Mills go after in this case? What's the remedy? Who misrepresented?
Pagan?
Yeah, he has to go with pagan, right? Mills is left with the remedy of recovering from pagan or misrepresentation of fraud, but our HDC, Han, gets paid, right? Gets paid. Then you have your miscellaneous offenses. Thanks for reading that, all you're reading. There are additional limited offenses that cannot be used against HCC and include issues such as non-delivery, duress through threats, and prior payments. So all those are ones that the HCC does not have to abide by. However, universal offenses are different, right? Certain offenses are regarded as so basic that the social interest in preserving them outweighs the social interest of giving negotiable instruments the freely transferable qualities of money. These offenses are called universal offenses. And what's one reason we have negotiable instruments? To help us do what? Streamline what? Business, right? Commerce, keep things moving quickly, right? Fraud in factum, fraud in the instrument. When one person induces another person to sign an instrument, such as a note, by falsely representing that, for example, it is a contract for repairs or that it is a character reference, the note is invalid. The offense of fraud about the character of the instrument can be used against the holder in due course. So, for example, suppose that two homeowners are asked to sign a statement for a salesperson that he was in their home and did a demonstration of a new solar water heater. Just as the homeowner is about to sign the verification statement, the salesman distracts them and then switches the verification statement and places a purchase contract and promissory note for $5,000 solar water heating system to the owners. What can the owners do? They do. The owners would have a defense of what? Fraud in the factum against a holder in due course of this note. Why? Because they were induced, right? The difference between fraud in the inducement, a personal offense, and fraud in the factum, a universal defense, is that fraud in the factum involves deception as to the document themselves, not as to the underlying goods, services, or property. So here it's talking about what? In the factum, it's talking about the documents themselves, and that's why it's a universal offense. What about forgery or lack of authority? That's a defense also? What's forgery? When somebody signs somebody else's signature, something like that. The defense that a signature was forged or signed without authority can be raised by a drawer or maker against any HDC. The fact that the negligence of the drawer helped the wrongdoer does not prevent the drawee from raising the defense of forgery. Who's the drawee? That's the what? The bank, our credit union, huh? Chapter 28. Duress, deprive, and control. A party may execute or endorse a negotiable instrument in response to force of such a nature that, under general principles of law, duress makes a transaction void rather than merely voidable. Duress of this type and level may be raised as a defense against any holder. Economic duress, in the form of a reluctance to enter into financially demanding instrument, is not a universal offense. So that one's not economic, right? Duress that is attempted murder is a universal defense. Well, incapacity. Defense incapacity of a minor may be raised by the minor against any kind of holder. Other kinds of incapacity may be raised as a defense against any holder if the effect of the incapacity is to make the instrument void, as when there has been a formal declaration of insanity. Illegality. If an instrument is void by law when executed in connection with a certain conduct, such as a note for gambling or one that involves usury, such defenses may be raised against an HDC. Alteration. Oh, alteration? What's that? Alteration. An unauthorized change or completion of the negotiable instrument designed to modify the obligation of the party to change. Changing the amount of the instrument, right? Remember we talked about how handwriting prevails over the number before? So going from 150 to 450 is an alteration. Person making alteration. An alteration is a change made by a party, original party, or holder to the instrument. Recovery on the instrument is still possible under the terms of the instrument as it originally existed, if proof of the original terms is possible. What's the effect of alteration? If an alteration to the instrument was made fraudulently, the person whose obligation to the instrument was affected by that alteration is discharged from liability on the instrument. The instrument, however, can be enforced according to the original terms or its terms as completed, right? So you still get the original terms there. The right of enforcement is given to the holder in due course who had no notice of such alteration. For example, Ryan signed a negotiable instrument note for $100 made payable to Long. Second holder changed the amount from $100 to $700. A later holder in due course presented the note to Ryan for payment. Ryan would still be liable for the original what? $100. Okay, and then you have a summary of all this in figure 27-9. Very good, very good. Moving right along. Page 552. Volunteer, please. Liability parties? What are they talking about? Liability parties. What's this all about?
In this step is the process of giving knowledge. The time has come to bring all of them together to determine what happens when something does go wrong on a negotiable instrument. The defenses are clear, but the next step is answering who ends up paying and not paying when there is a good defense. Who has liability?
Thank you. So here, we're talking about what? Who's going to pay? Who's liable? If there is a defense, if something has gone wrong, in a step-by-step process of building knowledge that, about the types of instrument, the parties, and the special standing of holders and holders in due course, the time has come to bring all of them together to determine what happens when something does go wrong on a notional instrument. The defenses are clear, but the next step is answering who ends up paying and not paying when there's a good defense, who has liability and how. What are we going to do here? Yes, will you please reading for us, please? The contract role of parties and their liability.
Sure. Article 3 spells out the contractual duties that parties to the instrument have and the requirements for carrying out those contractual roles. By drafting, accepting, signing, or endorsing a negotiable instrument, a series of parties accept liability on the instrument. Primary parties. Every instrument has primary and secondary parties. The primary party is a party to whom the holder or holder in due course must turn first to obtain payment. The primary party on a note or certificate of deposit is the marker. For example, in figure 27-1, Phoenix Events is the maker of the note because Grace has signed the note directly as its agent, so Alvarez Tech Supply must turn to Phoenix Events as the primary party for payment. The primary party on a draft, checks, see chapter 28, is a drawee, assuming that the drawee has accepted the draft.
Now the drawee again is the bank, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Although a check must first be presented to the drawee bank for payment, the bank is not primarily liable on the instrument because the bank has a right to refuse to pay the check. The drawee of the draft is the party to turn to first. The maker of a note is a party to whom holders and holders in due course must first turn for payment. In figure 27-2, the drawee, the buyer, is the first party to turn to. So Kate's Ribbons would turn to Oscar's Ovens for payment.
Okay, keep going. Secondary parties, please.
The secondary parties or secondary arbiters is an instrument are those to whom holders turn when the primary party, for whatever reason, fails to pay the instrument. Secondary parties on those are endorsers. And secondary parties on checks and drafts are drawers and endorsers.
Let me stop right here for a second. Excellent. So here we have a check, and the person signs the back of it. Says, "Pay the order of Joe." Somebody on the back of it says, "Pay the order of George." Pay the order of Susan. Right, sign the back to pay the order. Right. So now Susan has it. Right, and she goes back. She goes up the line. Right, until somebody's supposed to pay. You go through those secondary parties. Suppose that Alvarez Tech Supply sells its notes regularly, and thanks again for reading, in order to increase its cash position. Alvarez could endorse a note to GE Capital, making GE the payee and Alvarez an endorser. If Phoenix Event does not pay, GE could turn to Alvarez as an endorser to collect on the note, and Alvarez would be left to try and collect what? From Phoenix Events. Next step for enforcing credit contract liability. Next steps for enforcing contract liability. Because Article 3 has set up an orderly process for liability, there are steps that the parties to the instrument must take in order to enforce their rights and collect under the negotiable instrument. All right? Remember I mentioned this last week? Presentment. That's when you go to what? To the bank and you what? Ask for money? Ask to have the instrument what? Paid? A formal request for payment on an instrument. So you go to tell her, say, "Hey, could you cash this?" Right? You sign it. Remember, it's the first required step and occurs when the holder or ACC of an instrument, orally, in writing, or by electronic communication to the primary party, requests that the instrument be paid. The primary party has a right to require that the presentment be made in a what? Commercially reasonable manner. We've seen that before, which would include reasonable times for presentment, such as during business hours. The primary party can also require identification, right, authorization, and even a signature of receipt of the funds. In addition, the primary party can demand a valid endorsement on the instrument prior to the making payment. Upon presentment, the primary party is required to pay unless there are defenses such as forgery. See Chapter 28. Any of the other universal offenses for HCCs or any defenses for holders. For example, getting to figure 21.7 as one example, GE must first present the note to Phoenix Events before it can turn to Alvarez Tech for payment. What's dishonor? What's dishonor? If the primary party refuses to pay the instrument according to its terms, where we made presentment and say, oh, we don't pay it, right? There can be a dishonor, and the holder is then left to turn to the secondary parties. The primary party is required to give notice of dishonor. The notice can be oral, written, or electronic, and is subject to time limitations for checks. The time limitation for notice are controlled by both the UCC and the federal banking laws, Chapter 28. Non-banking primary parties must give notice of dishonor within 30 days following the receipt of notice of dishonor. Upon the dishonor, the holder can then turn to the secondary party for payment. The primary party must have a valid reason for refusing the payor or to be liable for wrongful dishonor. A valid reason would be any of the offenses covered in what Section 27-4 or the failure of the presenting party to provide sufficient identification. Suppose that in Figure 27-2, Kate Ribbons negotiated its draft to one of its vendors, Spools of Syracuse. Kate endorsed the draft simply by stamping Kate's Ribbons on the back of the draft. If Oscar Owens asked for additional verification of Kate Ribbons' transfer of the draft, it would not be unreasonable because Oscar Owens would be verifying the endorsement and trying to avoid possible unauthorized signature. So in that case, hey, that stamp's not going to be enough, right? Warranty liabilities. What are they? What are warranty liabilities? Article 3 also requires that parties to an instrument, whether primary or secondary, provide certain warranties as they create and transfer negotiable instruments. Now we're getting warranties. There are 3 warranties that those who present instruments for payment give, and 5 warranties those who are transfer instruments give. So 3 warranties that those who present instruments for payment give, and 5 that those who transfer instruments give. Warranties of presenters. Presenters are those who present the instruments to the primary party for what? For payment. Example, if Alvarez Tech Supply transfers instrument to GE and GE presents this to Phoenix Events for payment, GE warrants that it is authorized to present and enforce the draft, and that the draft has not been altered, and that GE has no knowledge that the signature of the drawer is forged. Adding additional wrinkles to the facts shows how the warranties provided protection. Suppose that an employee at Alvarez Tech changed the amount on the note to $13,600 from $3,600 before it is sold to GE. Okay, so they're going to sell this note to GE. And the employee kept the extra amount that GE paid. Okay. Then GE presents the draft to Phoenix Events, and Phoenix Events simply processes the draft payment as one of the many that flow through its account payable department. Later, when Phoenix Events discovers that overpayment, it can turn to GE for breach of the warranty that their instrument has not been altered. GE must return the excess amount it received to Phoenix Events for the breach of the warranty. However, GE has the protections covered in the following section. Warranties of transfers. Transferors give what? 5 warranties. Number 1, that they are entitled to enforce the instrument. They're entitled to enforce it. 2, that the signatures are what? Genuine and authorized. 3, that there has been no alteration, right? 4, that there are no defenses to the instrument. And 5, that the transfer has no knowledge of any insolvency proceedings. Alvarez is a transfer to GE, and the instrument has been altered, so GE can recover from Alvarez. These rules of liability and warranties always lead us back to the first party who could have prevented the problem. There you go. The employee at Alvarez Tech altered instrument, and the employee is responsible for the difference. But if the employee cannot pay, then under agency principles, the employer, Alvarez, is responsible for the acts of the employee and to GE, which is in chapter 37. So now you see where you have the employer-employee relationship comes into play also when an employee does something wrong, right? Any questions on that? You know what? Somebody read for me, please, on page 555, the summary. The summary, thank you.
An instrument or modification is transferable, non-promise, or order to pay a specified sum of money that is evidenced by a record. An instrument is negotiable when it needs to use receipt or receipt money. Negotiable instruments have two categories. One, promises to pay, and two, orders to pay. Checks and drafts are orders to pay. Notes and certificates are deposits or promises to pay. The parties to a note are the marker and agreee. The parties to a draft are the drawer,
Maker and pay, huh? Maker and pay, huh?
The requirements of negotiation.
So the parties to a note are the maker and the payee. The parties to a draft are the drawer, the drawee, and the payee. So the drawer is who? That's who? That's you, right? You're signing it, you're making the check out. Who's the drawee? That's our what? That's our bank or credit union, right? And who's the payee? That's UI, right? Remember I used the example of UI? We're paying a bill at UI. So we're the drawer, right? We're the one writing the check out, okay? And then it goes to the bank, right? The bank pays it. And who's the payee? To UI. All right, so those are your three parties. Keep going, please. Then it gets more in depth, right? It takes it from there to go to the next level. Okay, go ahead, keep going.
The requirements of negotiability are that the instrument, one, be in writing, two, be signed, authenticated by the maker or the drawer. Three, contain an unconditional promise or order. Four, to pay a sum certain money. Five, be payable on demand or at a definite time. And six, have words of negotiability to order or bearer. If an instrument meets the requirements of negotiability, parties have the rights and protections of the contract. If it does not meet the requirements of negotiability, the rights of the parties are governed under contract law. Negotiable instruments are transferred through deliveries for bill paper and endorsement and delivery for order paper, known as the process of negotiation. When a proper negotiation occurs, the whole party becomes a holder of the instrument. If the transfer meets additional requirements, that transferee becomes a holder in due course. A holder in due course is a holder who receives a negotiable instrument for value without notice of defenses, such as the instrument being dishonored or overdue. The process for obtaining payment on a negotiable instrument requires presentment to the primary party and the first person liable on the instrument. Primary parties are the drawee of drafts and the maker of notes. To check, primary presentment occurs to the drawee bank. If the primary party does not sign, the holder of the instrument then turns to the secondary party. There are defenses for primary and secondary parties that allow them to refuse to pay the note. Those defenses include personal and real defenses. Holders in due course are not subject to the personal defenses. The order of presentment and liability and defense will determine who will ultimately pay what is due on an instrument if there is a problem with the instrument, such as forgery or alteration.
Thank you so much for reading that. What's the imposter rule? Thanks again. Thank you all for reading. What's the imposter rule? I want people. What is that? Yeah, what in the world is the imposter rule? Let's go there. We're leaving now. Any more questions? Chapter 27? Let's go to chapter 28 then, okay? Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. What in the world, in chapter 28, talk about checks, banks, and funds transfers. The imposter rule. Where is that? What is that? And in fact, let's take a moment and would someone read for me, please, on page 582, the summary for chapter 28, as we try to find out what in the world is the imposter rule? What's that all about? What in the world? What's this next chapter that's so important for us to understand and get a hand on? On page 582, starts with a check is a particular kind of a draft. It's a little bit of a review, but that's okay. Let's take a look at it. What hell was out there, Joseph? You see it? Oh, now we have different type of checks, huh? Right? You're talking about different checks? An ordinary check, right? A cashier's check, or a teller's check. I know you read this a long time ago. It's a good review, right? Keep going.
It's not controlling, otherwise it's reading. The delivery of a certified check, a cashier's check, or a teller's check, the charges to defer which is given up to the amount of the check. Certification on the check by the bank is the acceptance of the check. The bank becomes the primary party, certification, primary party. Certification may be...
Let me ask you a question. When a person goes to the bank or credit union and they say, hey, I'd like you to cash this, what do you call that? Gives it a P. That's called what? Presentment, right? When they present the check, right? So here, they're talking about certification of a check by bank is acceptance of the check. The bank becomes a primary party. Oh, they become acceptor, huh? Certification may be at the request of the drawee or the holder. Certification by the holder releases all prior endorsers and drawer from liability. So here, the name on the paper is not controlling, unless otherwise agreed. The delivery of a certified check, cash check, or teller's check discharges the debt for which it is given up to the amount of the check. Okay, so, hey, we know this thing is actually good, right? It talks about certification itself. Keep going, please, sir. Remotely created consumer orders, RCPOs.
and ACHs are payments that are directed by customers or consumers for their computers, from their computers, phones, or even watches, and have the same effect as a written check.
Whoa, what? You mean people can buy things from their phones, computers, watches? Have the same effect as a check? The textbook is recognizing what? In our society.
Just like Venmo,
They're recognizing things are changing, right? Right. In fact, you can link your account, your checking account, right, or savings account to your phone and pay bills and things like that, right? Mm-hmm. Keep going, sir, please.
notice of non-payment of a check must be given to the drawer of the check. If no notice is given, the drawer is discharged from liability. A depositor may stop payment on a check, however, the depositor is liable to a holder in due course unless the stop payment order was for a reason that it may be raised against the holder in due course. The stop payment order may be orally binding for 14 calendar days, with a record effective in 6 months. The depository bank is the agent of the depositor for the purpose of collecting the deposit item. The bank may become liable when it pays a check contrary to a stop payment order, or when there is a forgery or an alteration. The bank is not liable, however, if the driver's negligence is.
So, let me go back here. Notice of non-payment of a check must be given to the drawer of a check. No notice given the drawer is discharged from liability. What's it mean by that? You have to give notice to someone, right, that it's not being paid. What's this depositor may stop payment on a check? It might be something going on that is not one where they're allowed to stop payment, right? Deposit bank is agent of the depositor for the purpose of collecting the deposited item. The bank may become liable when it pays a check contrary to a stop payment order or when there has been a forgery or an altercation. The bank is not liable, however, if the drawer's negligence has substantially what? Contributed to forgery? What's that mean? What's that mean? The drawers. What's that mean, my good people? What are they saying there? Help me out, my beautiful people. What's that mean? What does that sentence mean? The bank is not liable, however, if the drawer's negligence has substantially contributed to the forgery. Who are they blaming? Yeah, right? They're drawing what? The drawer made a mistake, right? Yeah. It wasn't the bank, okay? Although there'll be, as you read this, if you haven't read already, you'll see that many of these rules favor banks too. Keep going, please.
A bank that pays on a forward instrument must recredit the drawer's account. The depositor is subject to certain time limitations to enforce liability of the check. Banks are subject to reporting requirements under the USA Breaches Act. Customers must examine canceled checks or their electronic images or paid items to see whether any were improperly paid.
Let's stop there. What are they talking about?
They're talking about, when much like electronic images, so that's like pausing a check or something.
Why?
Their bank statements.
Yeah,
Why?
just to make sure that.
Hold, you mean the customer has responsibility to look at the statements? And here it's all about the what? The images? To make sure nothing's wrong? Customers must examine canceled checks or their electronic images or paid items to see whether any were improperly paid. Banks are generally held liable for forgery of the customer's signature. However, there are exceptions on the imposter. Oh, the imposter rule! When banks are protected from liability because the customer has been negligent in allowing the forgery to occur. I think I mentioned last week that I want to show you the Superman 3. Richard Pryor is an expert in computers, and it's an old movie, but someone says to him, he gets their check, and it's like, man, you know, the check is for whatever, in something cents, right? They're like, man, I wish I had all those cents, you know, out there, and they're getting like coffee to drink, and so Richard Pryor goes, dings, right? Like, hey, that's a good idea. And he said, how many sugars you want? Oh, 2 cents. Anyway, so he goes back on his computer. He's working as a computer expert, right? An old computer. And he does some type with the computer, things that no one knows how to do, but he can do it on a computer. And he takes all the half cents throughout the entire corporation, the worldwide corporation, wherever it is, you know, everything, right? And creates a dummy payee, right? Hospital, dummy payee, right? And like that. And so the guy comes, it's payday, and they're pushing the thing, and you go by Richard Pryor, and you go, here you go. He opens it up and goes, okay, excuse me, isn't there another check for me? And so the guy goes, oh yeah, there's another one, give it to him. That's the dummy check. And goes, he opens it up, it's like $86,000. Goes, oh. starts waving around and like that and all. So, next thing you see is the president of the corporation is an accountant, right? And someone else is there too. And the accountant's older gentleman says, in the old days, people would steal by using accounts and paper. Now these computers, they can do a whole lot of things. They use these computers to steal for us, and it's going to be so hard to find the person. So they're like on the 10th floor, where they're real way far up, this big window there. And so the president walks in the mirror and said, no, we'll never find this person unless they're a complete idiot. And so he looks down, and he sees Richard Pryor driving a red Ferrari. I'll tell you how it was. We did. It's Richard Pryor. Remember that. But the point is, who's responsible? Who's responsible for that? According to our textbook, say, who's responsible if the bank cashed that check? Do you go after the bank or credit union?
I would say
Who could have stopped it?
the bank.
You. Who else could have stopped it? The company, right? And so when we look at those imposter rules, right, see different rules, dummy pay, certain things like that. Who's liable for this when it happens, and who is in the best situation to prevent it from happening? Okay, prevent it from happening. So, huh?
It was a real check. Like the company actually made him a check, but
He created a dummy payee, right? So he created a false check. He embezzled money, right? Well, he stole money, right? And created this. And he went to the bank and cashed it. So our issue is, hey, well, who's liable here for something like that? And it's an interesting industry. Then it talks about electronic funds transfer as a transfer of funds other than a transaction originated by check, draft, or other commercial paper, as initiated through electronic means. Electronic funds transfer, EFTA, requires the financial institutions furnish customers with specific information containing all the terms and conditions of the EFTC services. Under certain conditions, the financial institution will bear the loss for unauthorized transfers. Under other circumstances, the customer will bear the loss. Regulation E provides consumer protection for advanced disclosure about costs and rights when using remittance transfer providers. Hold there. Electronic funds transfer is a transfer of funds other than a transaction originated by check, draft, or commercial paper. You mean, are they talking about when you put your card in the machine? Huh? That is initiated through electronic means. Electronic funds transfer, or maybe you're on the computer, right? Requires that a financial institution furnish consumers with specific information containing all the terms and conditions of the EFT services. By the way, is the machine an agent of the bank? That'll come up a little later on. Under certain conditions, the financial institution will bear, and the answer is yeah, the loss for unauthorized transfer. Under other circumstances, the consumer will bear the loss. Regulation E provides consumer protection for advanced disclosures about costs and rights when using remittance transfer providers. Funds transfer regulated by UCC Article 4A are those made between highly sophisticated parties that deal with large sums of money. If any part of the funds transfer is subject to the EFTA, such as consumer transactions, the entire transaction is expressly excluded from the scope of the Article 4A. A funds transfer is simply a request or instrument to pay a specific sum of money to or to the credit of a specified person. Wow. So we can see that this chapter has a lot of info in it, and we'll be getting into this shortly.